This is the final video which will discuss intervals, and we will be looking at inverted intervals and compound intervals. Inverted intervals are quite simply intervals which are turned upside down. In this example, the lower note F, the upper note is B. The inversion of this interval, the lower note is now B, the upper note is F. You have the same two notes, just flipped over. Inverted interval pairs fall into predictable patterns. A unison will always invert to an octave, a second will invert to a seventh, a third to a sixth, and a fourth to a fifth. If you look a little bit closer, you will see that the numbers of the two interval pairs that invert add up to 9. A 1 to an 8 is 9, 2 to a 7 is 9, etc. You can count on this. This will always be true. Quality is predictable as well when you are inverting intervals. Major always inverts to minor. So we have G to B is a major third, and B to G is a minor sixth. So 3, 6 adds up to 9, major inverts to minor. Augmented will always invert to diminished. So G to B sharp is an augmented third, B sharp to G is a diminished sixth. And finally, perfect will always invert to perfect. So G to D is a perfect fifth, D to G is a perfect fourth. One way that inversions can be useful is when you are asked to write a large interval below a given note. That can be a confusing situation. Instead, I like to sometimes think about the inversion. So in this example, let's say we would like to write a major seventh below this F. The first step that I would do is write in the generic interval, just so you don't get confused in the end. And generically, some kind of seventh below an F is going to be a G. So you know that in the end you have to have a G, and it has to be in this octave. The next question I ask myself is, what is the inversion of a major seventh? It's a minor second. So what is a minor second above F? G flat. Now we write the inversion because our final destination is actually a major seventh. So if a minor second above F is G flat, then a major seventh below F is also going to be G flat. And then as a last step, I would probably check my work and ask myself, in the key of G flat major, is there an F natural? And yes, there is, so this is the correct answer. Compound intervals are intervals which are larger than an octave. And in practice, they're intervals which are larger than octave, but we aren't going to go bigger than 2 octaves. A compound interval will always have the same quality as its simple interval pair. So if G to D is a perfect fifth, then G to this D up here is also going to be a perfect fifth. If A to C is a minor third, A an octave lower to the same C is going to be a minor tenth. So to identify the quality of a compound interval, if you're starting with a compound, reduce the interval until you get it to a simple interval, one which is smaller than an octave. So here's our first example, E to B flat. If you take this B flat down an octave, now you have E to B flat smaller than an octave, and we see that this is a diminished fifth. So E to this upper B flat is going to be a diminished 12th. How are you going to know what number to use? Well, there are 2 ways. You could count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 lines and spaces. That method will always work no matter how far you go. Or think 5 plus 7 equals 12. So if you add 7 to the simple interval, you will get the number for the compound interval. And never invert a compound interval. One problem that happens when doing exercises, that when you have some exercises which are inverted intervals and some exercises which are compound intervals, be careful not to get those two confused. A compound interval will always have the same lower note. So here in this pair, the E is always the lower note, and you're just stretching it out bigger than an octave. So E, lowest note, B flat, upper note. E is still the lowest note, B flat is the upper note. And remember that in inverted intervals they flip.